The door swung open, and elderly Margaret stepped into the HOA meeting hall, a prosecutor's badge pinned prominently to her chest. Chairman Mr. Richardson turned pale and slowly sank into his chair, speechless. But what happened next shocked absolutely everyone. However, let's start from the very beginning. Julia had moved in with her grandmother Margaret just a week ago, settling into a cozy suburb nestled among greenery and blooming gardens. The streets were quiet, houses tidy, and neighbors appeared friendly and welcoming. Each morning began with birdsong and the fragrance of lilacs filling the air with peaceful tranquility. This particular morning, sunlight streamed gently through the kitchen's white curtains as Julia stood by the coffee maker, gazing thoughtfully out the window. She watched her grandmother and Bailey, their Labrador, joyfully strolling across the lawn. Julia smiled warmly, seeing the silver-haired woman, whose gently lined face radiated happiness next to her beloved dog. Margaret had lost her husband 2 years prior, and loyal Bailey had become her primary source of support, rescuing her from loneliness. Suddenly, the idyllic moment shattered abruptly as the doorbell rang piercingly, insistent, and almost rude. Alarmed, Julia set aside her cup and hurried toward the door, a vague unease twisting in her chest. At the threshold stood a tall man, impeccably dressed in a perfectly pressed suit and neatly knotted tie. It was Mr. Richardson, chairman of the local HOA, known for his strictness and meticulousness. His cold eyes peered over his glasses, his face openly arrogant. Without even acknowledging Julia, he spoke loudly, intentionally drawing the neighbors' attention. "Margaret, you're flagrantly violating the rules of our residential community." Margaret, just returning from her walk, approached the door with bewilderment. Dressed simply in her house cardigan, her gray hair neatly gathered in a bun, she was visibly puzzled. "What do you mean, Mr. Richardson?" With dramatic formality, Richardson sharply waved a document as if handing down a criminal verdict. The HOA board at yesterday's meeting decided to prohibit residents from owning dogs. You have exactly 1 week to get rid of your dog, or you'll face a significant fine and further consequences. His words struck like a blow. Julia felt a chill run down her spine. Margaret paled, her eyes widening in shock. Instinctively, she rested a protective hand on Bailey's head. Sensing danger, the dog whimpered softly, pressing closer to her legs. "But Bailey has lived with me for years. He's completely harmless and bothers no one," Margaret responded, her voice trembling. Richardson smirked contemptuously, clearly anticipating these objections. "Rules are rules. There will be no exceptions. If you disagree, you're welcome to find another place to live." Margaret drew in a sharp breath, as though physically wounded by his words. Tears of helplessness glistened in the elderly woman's eyes. Julia clenched her fists, fury bubbling in her chest. She glared at Mr. Richardson, who seemed to relish his power over a defenseless elderly woman. At that moment, she felt the full injustice of the situation, a stroke of a pen threatening to strip away her beloved grandmother's happiness and peace. Richardson confidently turned and walked away, assured of his dominance. Little did he know, behind the elderly woman's fragile appearance stood not just a grandmother, but someone who had spent a lifetime upholding law and justice, the city's chief prosecutor. This act of blatant injustice would soon prove to be his fatal mistake, leading to consequences that would shake the entire HOA to its core. Grandma Margaret, always so calm and composed, looked utterly defeated that evening. She sat in an armchair by the fireplace, gazing sadly and thoughtfully into the flames. The warm glow gently illuminated her wrinkled face, reflecting a damp sparkle in her eyes. Bailey lay quietly beside her, pressing close to her feet as if sensing her pain and anxiety. "You know, Julia," Margaret softly spoke, staring into the fire, "I've spent my entire life defending the law and justice. But I never imagined injustice would one day knock on my own door,
threatening to take away what's dearest to me. Margaret's voice quivered slightly as she gently stroked Bailey's golden fur. The dog lifted his head, looking up into her eyes with unwavering devotion. "When your grandfather passed away, I felt completely lost," Margaret continued, her voice now stronger, filled with deep emotion. "It felt as if the light in my life had gone out forever. Then Bailey appeared in my life, an energetic puppy who became my lifeline. Whenever I thought loneliness would consume me, he would sit quietly by my side, rest his head on my lap, and look at me as though he understood my every feeling. He's not just my dog. I love him deeply. He's family. He's a part of me." Tears welled up in her eyes, and Margaret quickly turned away, trying to hide them. Julia's heart tightened in pain and outrage. She silently vowed she wouldn't allow this injustice to prevail. She would protect her grandmother and Bailey at all costs. The next morning, filled with determination, Julia attended the HOA meeting. In the small hall, neighbors had already gathered, each seeming tense and slightly uneasy. At the head of the table sat Mr. Richardson, wearing an indifferent and arrogant expression. When it was Julia's turn, she stood and passionately tried to explain to the board that their decision to ban dogs was unjust and cruel, particularly toward her elderly grandmother. She spoke earnestly about how pets often represented the only source of joy and comfort for elderly people. But her words met an icy wall of Mr. Richardson's indifference. He interrupted harshly without allowing her to finish. "Rules are rules. If you don't like them, you're welcome to move elsewhere. The HOA won't change its decisions to accommodate one old lady's whims." His cold arrogance struck Julia like a physical blow. A sense of helplessness overwhelmed her, leaving a sinking emptiness in her chest. Tension filled the room, and people looked away, avoiding her eyes. Julia realized there was nothing more she could achieve here. Leaving the meeting, she felt deep despair. The pain from the injustice was suffocating. Yet suddenly, as if struck by lightning, an important realization dawned upon her, causing her to stop abruptly in the middle of the street. "How could I have forgotten?" flashed through her mind. Grandma Margaret wasn't just an elderly woman who adored her dog. She was someone whose authority and professionalism commanded the entire city's respect. The chief prosecutor, whose opinion even high-ranking officials valued deeply. Without wasting another moment, Julia quickly took out her phone, dialing her grandmother's number. Resolutely, she declared, "Grandma, I think it's time to play your strongest card."
The next day, the atmosphere at the HOA meeting was tense and anxious. Residents whispered among themselves, cautiously glancing toward Mr. Richardson, who, as usual, sat confidently at the head of the long table, inspecting those present with an air of arrogant superiority. He was utterly convinced that, once again, no one would dare oppose him. But at that very moment, the doors to the meeting hall swung open decisively, silencing everyone instantly in stunned surprise. Standing in the doorway was Margaret Langston, but she looked entirely different from usual. Instead of her cozy cardigan, she wore a sharp, dark blue business suit that emphasized her authority and dignity. Pinned prominently to her jacket lapel was a gleaming gold badge identifying her as the city's chief prosecutor, unmistakably announcing the strength and power concealed within this seemingly ordinary elderly woman. The room was engulfed in deathly silence. Julia watched as Mr. Richardson's eyes widened in shock and fear, his face draining of color so rapidly it appeared all the blood left his body at once. Slowly, as if the strings holding him up had been cut, he sank helplessly into his chair. Margaret calmly and confidently strode toward the board's table as though she'd waited her entire life for this pivotal moment. Her gaze briefly met Mr. Richardson's, clearly signaling that the rules of the game had just changed. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Her voice rang out coldly and distinctly, slicing through the silence like a sharp blade. "I am not here as an ordinary resident of your community, but as the chief prosecutor of this city.
and I have accumulated quite a few questions for the management of our HOA." She paused dramatically, allowing her words to sink deeply into the hearts of everyone present. Julia felt immense pride swell inside her for her grandmother. Margaret opened a folder of documents, her voice now carrying the steely edge and confidence of a seasoned professional, aware of the weight behind every word she spoke. "For several years now, Mr. Richardson, you and your board have systematically violated residents' rights, ignored their legitimate needs, and made decisions driven solely by your personal interests. We have uncovered repeated instances of corruption, abuse of authority, and misuse of homeowner funds, all grave violations of the law, which you will soon answer for in court." Each of Margaret's words landed clearly and unequivocally, sounding like an irrefutable verdict. The audience listened intently, stunned by these revelations. Some exchanged astonished glances, while others nodded in agreement, finally feeling that the truth had come to light and justice was within reach. When Margaret concluded her speech, the room momentarily plunged into shocked silence. Then the silence shattered, replaced by loud, heartfelt applause. Residents stood up from their seats, applauding the bravery and determination of the woman who dared to confront injustice. Their faces shone with gratitude and admiration. Julia, standing by the wall, couldn't take her eyes off her grandmother. Pride, admiration, and deep love filled her heart for this seemingly fragile woman, whose inner strength had toppled even the most powerful adversary. Meanwhile, Mr. Richardson sat motionless in his chair, completely broken, unable even to lift his eyes. His authority, power, and confidence, qualities he had so proudly wielded, crumbled instantly, leaving behind nothing but a pathetic emptiness and the stark realization of his utter helplessness in the face of true justice. After that memorable meeting, life in the small neighborhood noticeably changed. The HOA quickly reversed its unjust decision, realizing they had severely underestimated the strength of their opponent. Mr. Richardson, who once proudly issued orders and relished his small authority, was now forced to humbly resign. He left his office in silence, avoiding the residents' gazes as though afraid he'd find the condemnation and contempt he truly deserved. Margaret's house filled with warmth and happiness. Every day, neighbors knocked on her door, bringing flowers, homemade pastries, and letters expressing sincere gratitude. Many who previously feared speaking out now approached Margaret bravely, thanking her for becoming an inspiring example of courage and justice. These simple gestures of appreciation deeply touched her heart, making her eyes shine with gentle joy. Soon, the quiet neighborhood transformed into a place where people openly discussed their problems without fear of being ignored. Margaret had inspired them to believe in their strength and fight for what truly mattered. Now, they knew justice was always worth fighting for, and no one should remain silent in the face of injustice. Julia, watching these events unfold, finally grasped the true meaning behind her grandmother's words. She felt confidence building within herself, confidence she'd previously thought unattainable. Now she clearly understood how important it was to never back down from difficulties and always protect those you love. On the lawn in front of the house, Bailey joyfully played, oblivious to the fact that he'd become a symbol of a small but significant revolution in the peaceful neighborhood. He barked happily, chasing after sticks as if nothing unusual had ever happened, as if the world had always been as bright and kind as it was now. Margaret stood on the porch, smiling softly at her granddaughter and lovingly observing her family, Julia and the joyful, carefree Bailey. Then, in a gentle yet deeply sincere voice, she quietly said to Julia, as if speaking directly to her granddaughter's heart, "Never let anyone else make decisions for you, Julia. Always fight for what you believe in, even if the whole world stands against you." Julia felt those words resonate within her, stirring a powerful wave of inspiration and certainty. She stepped forward, tightly embracing her grandmother, feeling her warmth and strength that assured her she was ready to move forward, protecting herself and those she loved, no matter what challenges lay ahead.